Silas adjusted the weight of the oxygen tank on his back and stepped over a tangle of loose cabling, the metallic clatter of his boots echoing down the hollow corridor. The relic groaned around him, an ancient orbital station half swallowed by time and silence. Rust had crept like rot across the walls, and flickering lights fought to stay alive. He moved carefully, fingers grazing the pulse of the structure as if listening to a dying animal. He wasn't here for heroics. He was a mechanic, not a soldier anymore. Not since the war ended with more graves and victors. These places, these dead machines circling forgotten planets, were graves of a different kind. He scavenged them for parts, old tech still pulsing with enough energy to buy his next breath on the surface below. And then he'd move on. A console blinked weakly in the gloom ahead. He crouched beside it, pried open the panel, and connected a data probe. As the terminal hummed to life, Silas leaned in, squinting at the scrolling characters. The language was alien, yet familiar, a blend of old Coalition code and an older, more elegant script that made his throat tighten. This station had once belonged to the Karev, the Wolfkin of the outer systems. Allies, or they had been. A sharp ping interrupted his thoughts. Behind the console, a hatch hissed open, revealing a cryopod suspended in a tangle of broken wires and coolant mist. It hadn't been activated by his probe. It was dying on its own schedule. Inside the pod lay a creature built of both terror and grace. A Karev, enormous even in stillness, limbs curled in paralysis, for clinging to skin like frost. Its body was riddled with scars, one eye shut, the other dim and flickering gold. Silas froze. He hadn't seen one in years. Not alive. Most had perished when the vast Grief fleet wiped out their sanctuary moons. This one had survived. The cryopod beeped erratically, then stuttered to silence. The glass hissed open halfway before jamming, leaving the chamber to leak cold vapor into the room like a fading breath. The Karev did not move. Silas stepped closer, rifle drawn by instinct, though he didn't raise it. The creature's chest rose in shallow rhythm. Alive, but barely. He should have walked away. The relic would fall apart soon anyway. He had supplies enough for one more salvage run and a hard ride home. But something in the way the wolf's head twitched, a silent attempt to look at him, froze his decision. Silas set the rifle down and reached toward the pod. "If you can hear me, don't bite," he muttered. The Karev's eye tracked his hand. There was awareness there. Not instinct, not reflex. Pain. He popped the emergency latch and hoisted the pod's edge open wider, struggling as metal groaned and resisted. The wolf's body slumped out, massive and limp. Muscles trembled beneath its skin. Whatever war it had fought, it had lost more than blood. "You're paralyzed," he said aloud, the words tasting strange. "Nerve damage. Spinal trauma." A low rumble came from the wolf's throat. Broken, breathless. Not a growl, but something almost human in its intent. A wordless plea. Silas looked at it for a long time. At the cable snaking into its spine, the fragment of battlesuit still embedded in fur, the unmistakable design of Karev bioweapons fused into its shoulder. It had been a warrior. No, it was a warrior, and someone had left it behind. Silas knelt, brushing ice crystals from his face. "You're not supposed to be here. You should have died with the others." The wolf blinked slowly. "You want to live?" The silence answered him. He sighed and shifted his pack off his shoulders. Pulling out a set of adjustable harness straps, he began fashioning a sling. Every part of him screamed that this was madness. This creature was a relic like the station itself. Dangerous, unpredictable, possibly hostile. But something deeper, a mechanic's instinct or guilt masquerading as duty, spoke louder. He wrapped the straps around the wolf's body with the care of a man repairing a delicate engine. Then, bracing himself, he hoisted the Karev onto his shoulders. The weight nearly crushed him, but he didn't let go. The wolf's head rested against his back, breathing shallow, but still breathing. Silas staggered forward, adjusting the rifle slung across his chest, the cables hanging from the walls brushing against his shoulders as he moved. The relic trembled with distant tremors. Power surges lit the corridor ahead. "Let's find a way out," he muttered. Behind him, the cryopod emitted one last beat and died completely. Ahead, the corridor stretched into shadow and broken light. The corridors of the relic narrowed into skeletal ribs of metal and shadow. Silas moved carefully, each step a calculated defiance against the weight on his back. The Corel was impossibly heavy, its form pressing down like guilt-made flesh. He grunted as he adjusted the makeshift harness, sweat beading beneath his collar despite the cold. Lights flickered overhead, casting long, angular shapes on the warped floor. The silence was deceptive, pregnant with mechanical wheezing and the occasional pop of old wiring. The station wasn't just dying. It was decaying, cell by cell, bolt by bolt. Silas paused near a junction panel, his breath fogging the air. A flick of his wrist activated the holomap he'd salvaged earlier. What remained of it anyway? Fractured data painted a ghost of the relic's layout, incomplete and flickering. Power cores on sub-level 4, he muttered, mostly to himself. The wolf on his back stirred slightly, a twitch in one of its hind legs. No movement beyond that. Silas glanced over his shoulder. The creature's eyes remained shut, but its breathing was shallower now. Time was collapsing around them. He needed to find a med station, or at least something with stabilizers. The corridor ahead split in two, one path lit dimly by still-functioning wall strips, the other darker but drier, less warped. He chose the dark path. Light meant exposure. Exposure meant risk. Halfway through the tunnel, a sound stopped him cold, a clicking, rapid and sharp. His hand snapped to his rifle. The sound came again, closer this time. A maintenance drone, its shell dented and optics glowing red, scuttled from behind a collapsed bulkhead. It had once been built for cleaning and repair. Now it moved like a predator, its limbs sharpened into crude blades. It scanned him. He didn't wait. One squeeze of the trigger sent a low-impact stun round into the drone's central eye. It jerked violently, sparks bursting from its shell before it collapsed in a twitching heap. The Corel let out a low noise, a breath, more like a sigh. Silas looked back. The wolf's eye was open again, watching him. No words passed between them, but something did, a faint flicker of understanding, recognition even. "Yeah," he said, lowering the rifle. "You're not the only relic full of surprises." He kept moving, boots crunching over the debris of forgotten decades. They passed a shattered viewport that looked out onto a field of floating debris, ships reduced to spinning ribs of metal. A battlefield cemetery, without markers. Silas didn't linger. Memories pressed too close when he did. Eventually, he found a side chamber intact enough to offer shelter. It looked like an old hydroponics lab, long dead. Cracked glass canisters lined the walls. Vines turned to ash inside them. He laid the Karev gently on the ground. The wolf's limbs twitched again, more deliberate this time. Its head turned to follow his movement. Silas knelt beside him, pulling out a stim pack from his belt. "This might sting," he said. He jabbed the needle into the wolf's shoulder, just below a patch of matted fur. The creature didn't flinch. A second dose followed, something to counter neurological decay. He had no idea if it would work. Human medicine wasn't meant for alien biology. The wolf blinked slowly. Then, faintly, its jaws moved, not to snarl, but to shape something. Silas leaned in. "What is it?" No sound came, only a pulse in the air, warm, strange, brushing against the inside of the skull. Not words, but impressions, images. A great hall, burning, a pack scattered to the wind, a voice crying out orders over static. And then cold. Silence. Silas jerked back. The sensation was gone. "You were military," he said, rubbing his temple. "Command level, maybe. That's why they left you. Too valuable to risk falling into enemy hands." The wolf's eye held his for a long moment. Then it closed again. Silas sat back, the old ache in his knees flaring, as he dropped against the wall. He stared at the wolf, watching the slow rise and fall of its chest. The creature didn't belong in this dead place. It should have died with its kind, in glory or peace. Not like this. And yet here they were, two remnants, both discarded by a war that had long moved on without them. He reached for a strip of rations and chewed slowly, eyes scanning the flickering data panel nearby. The station's core was still active, barely. If he could get there, he might be able to trigger a full system reboot, at least enough to restore med systems, maybe even communication. He looked back at the Karev. If I get that system online, maybe we can call someone. Maybe someone's still out there who gives a damn. The wolf didn't respond, but its ear flicked slightly. Silas stood. Either way, you're not dying here. The path forward was long, and the station would only grow more unstable the deeper they went. But now there was direction. Purpose. He tightened the straps again, braced himself under the creature's weight, and pushed onward into the dark. A vibration pulsed beneath Silas's boots. Faint but unmistakable. A mechanical heartbeat buried deep within the relic's decaying shell. He adjusted his grip on the wolf's sling and pressed forward. The core chamber was near. The air had grown warmer, laced with ozone and the faint sting of hydraulic fluid. Pipes thrummed with erratic surges, like a body still firing neurons in its final death throes. Kane stirred against his back. The wolf's name had come to Silas like a whisper through his bones, etched in the residual energy of Kane's thoughts. It wasn't spoken. It didn't need to be. Kane was more than wounded flesh. He was a vault, a sentient archive of a culture that no longer breathed. And Silas wasn't carrying a dying creature anymore. He was carrying what was left of a civilization. Ahead, the corridor opened into a domed expanse, walls lined with inert display panels and branching conduits. A central column stretched from floor to ceiling, its base webbed with cooling systems and crack control arrays. This was the heart of the relic, though it beat no more. Silas eased Kane down onto a low platform and knelt beside a fractured console. The interface lit up under his touch, hesitant but functional. Code streamed across the screen in two scripts, human and Karev. Silas's brows furrowed. "You were fused into this place," he murmured, glancing back at Kane. "Not just physically. Your species designed this station with neurosync tech, didn't they?" Kane's eye opened, glowing faintly. The screen flickered. New lines of data bled into view. Coordinates, memory logs, encrypted files. Silas recognized none of it, but the system was responding to Kane's presence, drawn by some unseen link. "We might have a way to trigger a restart," Silas said, fingers flying over the keys. "But I need to route power manually from the auxiliary cores. It's going to pull heat signatures and light this place up like a flare." A low hum echoed above, then a creak of distant pressure valves releasing. Silas froze. That hadn't been him. He turned toward the corridor entrance. Light shifted just outside, shadows moving unnaturally, too precise for environmental drift. Scavengers. He heard the distinct hiss of decompression seals, followed by the soft click of boots. Not drones. People. Other salvagers, armed and unaware or uncaring that the relic wasn't dead yet. He drew his rifle and dropped into cover behind a scorched console. 3 figures entered, their suits mismatched, weapons drawn. Silas had seen their kind before. Contract scavs, hunting tech, not caring what lived or died in the wreckage. One of them pointed toward Kane. "That's a Karev." The voice crackled over a helmet speaker. "Intact." Silas stepped out and raised his weapon. "Step away." The lead scavenger barked a laugh. "That yours?" "He's under my protection." "Not anymore." They raised their rifles. Silas fired first, a stun burst that caught one in the chest and sent him sprawling. The others dove for cover, returning fire. Sparks exploded around him as slugs ricocheted off nearby panels. He dropped, rolled behind a pillar, and reloaded. The console behind him flared. Kane's eye opened fully now, glowing brighter, and the data interface surged. Silas felt it, an energy pressing into the room, thick and electric. Kane's body convulsed once. Then his front paw twitched. Silas stared. "You're sinking." Kane's limbs flexed. Not full movement, but something deeper. Command. The system was feeding back into him. Memories, structure blueprints, control signals, centuries of knowledge flooding a damaged mind. When the scavengers crept closer, raising a blade rifle, Kane growled. The sound was ragged, broken, but it shook the air. The scavenger flinched. Silas took the shot, dropping him. The last attacker turned to run, but the doors sealed themselves in a sudden hydraulic slam. Kane's eye narrowed, and through the console, Silas saw his influence. Subtle, but growing. "Keep going," Silas said, panting, smoke rising around him. "Rebuild what you can." Kane struggled to lift his head. His body trembled, joints locking into position like old gears finding teeth again. Silas knelt beside him, hand pressed against the thick fur. "I can hold them off. You finish it." But Kane had another idea. A secondary console powered up, and a message flickered onto the screen. Silas read it aloud. "You carry more than a body. You carry memory. Let me show you." Images erupted to the display. Golden cities, forests shaped by thought, packs of Karev walking alongside machines that sang. Then silence, fire, betrayal, and finally, Kane, locking himself into cryo before darkness took him. Silas blinked hard, the visions burning into his skull. He realized then, Kane wasn't trying to escape death. He was trying to pass something on. The console shifted again. Upload requires anchor. Silas hesitated. "If I do this, you'll be gone." Kane's eye held him, unwavering. It wasn't just survival. It was legacy. He was the last vessel of his people, and Silas, the broken mechanic, was his only lifeline. He reached out and pressed his hand to the panel. Heat surged through his palm as Kane's data poured in, like light compressed into liquid. For a moment, Silas felt every emotion the Karev had buried. Honor, rage, loss, hope. The scavenger bodies lay still behind them. The room was quiet again, except for the growing hum of the station, as systems rebooted slowly, one by one. Silas sagged to his knees, exhausted. Kane rested beside him, breath faint, but even. They hadn't won anything, not yet, but something was alive now, something bigger than either of them. And ahead, the core continued to pulse, a heart remembering how to beat. The station's heartbeat steadied. Lights that had once sputtered in exhaustion now glowed with purpose. Cooling fans stirred layers of ancient dust, and for the first time in decades, the Relic exhaled. Power lines hummed like forgotten veins rediscovering blood flow. Silas stood slowly, sweat cooling against his skin, the aftershock of Kane's transfer still rippling through his nerves. He looked at the wolf, half lying beneath the data console, his frame twitching with residual signals. Though still paralyzed from the waist down, Kane's breathing had steadied, his eye burning with the soft amber focus. Whatever had passed between them, memory, command, something deeper, it hadn't weakened Kane. It had tethered them. Silas checked the system readouts. Med bays online. External comms dormant but responsive. Life support stabilizing. The station wasn't just alive again, it was listening. "Can you still hear me?" Silas asked. Kane didn't answer aloud. Instead, a ripple of warmth brushed across Silas's thoughts, subtle and strangely grounding. Not speech, not language, just presence. "Good," Silas said. "Let's finish what we started." He triggered the medical node's location beacon and slung Kane onto the support rig again, his limbs wrapped securely. The passage to the med wing curved downward into a lower deck, where gravity had partially collapsed. The walls bowed inward like lungs caught mid-collapse. They passed through fire-scorched doors bearing Karev inscriptions. Words Silas didn't understand but felt in his bones. Warnings, blessings, prayers. He traced one with his glove. The med wing blinked to life the moment they crossed the threshold. Clean white light washed over sterile surfaces, flickering through decades of disuse. One pod remained functional, small, cracked, but intact. Silas lowered Kane gently into the cradle and began the activation sequence. The pod responded sluggishly, its processor damaged. He bypassed protocols and triggered a direct sync to Kane's neural trace. The wolf's limbs convulsed violently once. Then again, and again, the pod hissed as its stabilizer gel surged upward. Kane's chest arched in a silent roar, his claws scraping against the metallic rim. Silas moved to restrain him, but the wolf's eye caught his and held. There was no fear in it, only resolve. The pod sealed with a magnetic hiss. A status monitor flickered to life beside it, data climbing in erratic pulses. Tissue regeneration, nerve mapping, structural rewrites. All active. Silas exhaled and stepped back. "You're going to walk again," he murmured. maybe even fight. A console nearby blinked an incoming ping. He hesitated, then keyed it open. It was a distress signal. Not theirs. Old, but echoing to the reborn systems now like a whisper through newly open ears. Origin, deep orbit. Human encryption, degraded but legible. The relic had reconnected to the outer system network. And now, it was drawing attention. He tightened the straps on his gear and turned toward the door, rifle slung over his shoulder. He didn't know who would answer that signal or what they might bring. But he knew one thing with certainty. Kane wouldn't be alone again. He walked the corridor slowly, feeling the station shift underfoot, like something newly woken. Every step reminded him of the weight he'd carried, and what had carried him in return. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was an anchor, and he was ready for whatever came next.